Someone in the comments last week asked me why their Chevy Cruze turbo died at 60,000 miles. I asked them one question. How long do you idle your car before you shut it off after a highway drive? They said they just park it and kill the engine. I already knew exactly what killed that turbo because I have seen this exact damage pattern on dozens of Chevy turbochargers in my shop. Here are 7 habits that are killing your turbo, and I personally think number 3 is going to start some arguments. Number 1, shutting the engine off right after hard driving. This is the single most common turbo killer I see in the shop, and I will explain why. The shaft inside your turbo spins on journal bearings that float on a thin film of oil. We are talking thinner than a human hair. When you are driving hard, towing with your Silverado 1500, or running your Equinox on the highway for an hour, the exhaust side of the turbo housing can sit at over 1,000 degrees. Now you pull into your driveway and shut the engine off. Oil stops flowing instantly, but that heat does not disappear. It soaks into the center section of the turbo where all that oil is just sitting there. That trapped oil gets cooked to 400 to 500 degrees, way hotter than it was ever designed to handle. It oxidizes, thickens, and eventually turns into hard carbon deposits. I have scraped that stuff out of turbo housings with a pick, and it comes out like calcium buildup on a shower head. Those carbon deposits choke off the oil passages that feed the bearings. Less oil means more heat, which means more carbon, and the whole thing spirals until the bearings seize and the turbo eats itself from the inside. Now here is the thing, every modern Chevy turbo engine uses a water-cooled turbocharger. General Motors even programs the cooling fans on the Cruze to keep running for about 3 minutes after shutdown when the coolant is hot. The 2.7-liter turbo in the Silverado has an electric water pump that circulates coolant even with the engine off. So these systems help, but they do not eliminate the problem after extreme use. If you were towing, if you were in stop-and-go traffic on a hot day, if you were driving aggressively, just idle the engine for 30 to 60 seconds before you shut it off. After heavy towing, give it a full minute or 2. That is all it takes. The oil keeps flowing, the turbo cools down gradually, and you avoid that carbon death spiral. I had a customer with a 2021 Silverado who tows a camper every weekend. He idles for 90 seconds after every trip. That truck has 146,000 miles on the original turbo and it is running strong. But the next one is a turbo killer that is built right into the engine from the factory, and General Motors never bothered to fix it. Number 2. Ignoring your PCV system. This one is aimed directly at Cruze, Trax, Sonic, and Encore owners with the 1.4-liter Turbo Ecotec engine. I am not exaggerating when I say this is the most destructive design flaw. General Motors has put on a turbo engine in the last 15 years. The 1.4 turbo does not use a normal replaceable PCV valve. Instead, General Motors built a rubber diaphragm into the valve cover and hid a tiny orange check valve inside the intake manifold. Neither one is separately serviceable. Apparently, someone at General Motors decided that a serviceable PCV valve was too much to ask for on a turbocharged engine in 2011. You cannot just swap a $10 PCV valve like you would on an older engine. That orange check valve fails on every single one of these engines. I am not guessing. The Cruze Talk forum admin who has worked on more of these engines than probably anyone outside of a General Motors dealership says the failure rate is 100%. It is not a matter of if it happens, it is a matter of when. When that check valve cracks or gets sucked into the engine, boost pressure from the intake pushes backward through the PCV system into the crankcase. The crankcase pressurizes, blows out the valve cover diaphragm, and now you have a massive vacuum leak. Your turbo has to work dramatically harder to maintain boost. Oil vapor gets shoved into the intake and intercooler. Seals start popping all over the engine. I worked on a 2016 Cruze that needed a turbo replacement at 63,000 miles. GM covered half the cost. The owner paid about $900. Then 17,000 miles later, the new turbo failed too. Same root cause. The PCV system was never actually fixed. They just kept replacing parts downstream of the real problem. The factory fix is to replace the entire intake manifold and valve cover, which runs $300 to $500 in parts alone. The new manifold has the exact same defective check valve design. There is an aftermarket fix kit that relocates the check valve externally so you can actually service it in 5 minutes. It costs about $75. I personally think that is the better long-term solution than paying GM for the same broken part twice. If you have the 2.7 in your Silverado or Colorado, do not tune out. Your PCV system is better designed, but the lesson still applies. Any turbo engine with a failing PCV system is a turbo engine on borrowed time. If you are seeing oil in places it should not be, do not just wipe it off and forget about it. Now this next one is going to make some of you angry because it goes against everything you think you know about protecting your engine. Number 3, babying your Duramax. This is the one I said would start arguments. If you own a Duramax diesel and you treat it like a delicate piece of machinery, you are actively killing your turbo. I know that sounds backwards. Every other item on this list is about being gentle with your engine, but diesel turbos are different, and here is why. Every Duramax from the LLY generation onward, that is mid-2004 and newer, uses a variable geometry turbocharger. Inside the turbine housing, there are movable vanes connected by a steel ring. Those vanes direct exhaust across the turbine wheel. They close tight for quick, low RPM response and open wide at higher RPM for flow. Over time, carbon and soot from the exhaust system and from fuel that did not burn completely cakes up on those vane pivots and on that steel ring. When you idle your Duramax for long periods or drive it gently all the time, combustion temperatures stay low. Fuel does not burn completely. More soot gets produced. That soot lands directly on the turbo vanes. Oil pressure is also lower at idle, and on older Duramax engines, the vane mechanism actually relies on oil pressure to move. So at low idle, those vanes are not being exercised through their full range of motion. The carbon bonds get stronger, the vanes start to stick. I have talked to multiple diesel techs who all say the same thing. The trucks that come in with stuck turbo vanes are almost always the ones that get babied. Often it is the retired driver who stopped making his daily highway commute, or the construction truck that sits idling on a job site for hours. One Duramax tech told me his rule of thumb: if you are not occasionally giving it wide open throttle on the highway, you are asking for vane problems. The fix is simple. Drive the truck like a truck. Get on the highway and let it pull through the RPM range. Use your exhaust brake regularly, because that cycles the vanes too. If your Duramax sits and idles a lot for work, make a point to take it on a hard highway run every week or two. The newer L5P Duramax with the electronic actuator is better about this, but even those benefit from being driven with purpose. I did a whole video a while back on Duramax maintenance mistakes, and this was the #1 thing experienced diesel owners kept bringing up. Your turbo needs to be exercised. That is not optional. Now this next habit is the opposite problem. Instead of not driving your Duramax hard enough, this one is about stomping the gas pedal at the worst possible moment. Number 4. flooring it on a cold engine. When your engine is cold, the oil is thick and sluggish. It takes time for that oil to reach the turbo bearings and establish the thin film those bearings need to survive. If you fire up your Silverado or your Camaro 2.0 turbo on a cold morning and immediately stomp on it, the turbo shaft is spinning at maximum speed with minimum lubrication. Metal touches metal, the bearing surfaces get scored, and that damage is cumulative. Every cold start where you hammer it takes a little more life off those bearings. But there is a second problem that is specific to the Cruze 1.4. Those turbos are known for cracking right at the wastegate housing. Sudden hot exhaust gases hitting a cold cast iron housing creates thermal shock. Rapid expansion on one side, cold metal on the other, and cracks start forming. A Chevy dealership tech on the Cruze forums estimated that the majority of 1.4 turbos with over 50,000 miles have cracked wastegate housings. GM actually tells their technicians not to replace the turbo for those cracks alone because they consider them normal. Think about that for a second. The manufacturer is telling dealers that cracking is expected behavior. I personally think that says everything about how this turbo was designed for cost and not durability. You do not need to warm your engine for 10 minutes. That is overkill. Just drive gently for the first few minutes until the temperature gauge starts moving. No hard acceleration, no full boost. Let the oil get where it needs to go. That is all. And if you think thermal shock only comes from heat, wait until you see what cold weather does to these turbo systems. Number 5, letting intercooler condensation build up. If you live somewhere warm, you might think you can skip this one. But condensation builds up even in mild humidity, and if you ever drive your Chevy up north in winter or park it in an unheated garage, this applies to you too. This is a huge problem on the Equinox, Trax, Malibu, and the entire small turbo Chevy lineup in cold climates. GM actually admitted in a service bulletin that temperatures at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or colder can cause the charge air cooler to ice over. That is the intercooler, the part that cools compressed air coming from the turbo before it enters the engine. In humid cold conditions, moisture condenses inside the intercooler. When you park the car, that moisture freezes. Now you have ice blocking the airflow path that your turbo is trying to push compressed air through. The turbo works harder to compensate. You lose power. The engine stumbles and hesitates. One Trax owner in Canada found almost 2 cups of water sitting inside the intake manifold. The wastegate actuator was frozen solid. His dealer told him it was a known problem with no solution. The fix from General Motors involves an engine control module tune that keeps the transmission out of overdrive in extreme cold to maintain higher RPM and more heat in the intake tract. They also added a lower active shutter and offered a wastegate actuator wrap. But owners in truly cold climates report the fix is not fully effective. If you live anywhere that sees harsh winters, check your intercooler boots periodically. Some owners add a small drain at the bottom of the intercooler to let moisture escape, and avoid short trips in freezing weather when possible because the engine never gets hot enough to evaporate that condensation. The turbo itself is fine in the cold. It is the plumbing downstream that causes the problems. If you are getting something out of this video, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. That covers what is happening inside the intake. But there is another intake problem that sneaks up on you even faster. Number 6, ignoring boost leaks. A boost leak is basically a hole anywhere between the turbo and the engine where the air you just compressed escapes before it gets to the cylinders. When air leaks out, the turbo has to spin faster and work harder to make up for the lost pressure. It ends up working way harder than it was built to, running hotter and burning through bearings faster. On the Cruze 1.4, The plastic charge pipes between the intercooler and the throttle body get brittle with age and heat cycling. They crack, and sometimes they pop off a connection entirely. On the 2.0 LTG in the Equinox and Terrain, General Motors actually released revised charge air inlet pipe designs because the original part would loosen right at the turbo connection. On Duramax trucks, the intercooler boots swell and bloat under high boost over time. The original rubber gets soft and starts to mushroom out around the clamps. Aftermarket silicone boot kits are one of the most popular upgrades for the 2006 through 2010 Duramax models for exactly this reason. The tricky part about boost leaks is they can be small enough that you do not notice them during normal driving. The engine computer compensates by opening the wastegate less and keeping the turbo spinning harder. You lose a little power, maybe your fuel economy drops slightly, but you think everything is fine. Meanwhile, the turbo is slowly wearing itself out. If you notice even a slight hissing sound under acceleration, if your power feels a little flat compared to when the truck was new, check your charge pipes and intercooler connections before you assume the turbo itself is going bad. A $20 clamp or a $50 boot replacement is a lot cheaper than a new turbo. And this last one is going to get me some hate mail, but I have to say it. Number 7, running an aftermarket tune without the supporting mods. I saved this one for last because it is the one that generates the most angry comments. The 2.0-liter LTG in the Camaro, Malibu, and the older ATS and CTS has a strong aftermarket following. And the engine can make serious power. There are shops pushing 400, even 470 horsepower out of that platform with big turbo swaps and built internals. But here is where people get into trouble. They flash a tune on the stock engine expecting free horsepower and do not upgrade anything else. They do not upgrade the intercooler, the downpipe, or the fuel system. The stock pistons on the LTG are cast aluminum. They were not designed for sustained high cylinder pressures beyond what General Motors engineered them for. One forum member documented needing 2 replacement engines by 20,000 miles. The shop doing the work said they install pistons in LTG engines constantly. The turbo gets blamed, but the real failure is usually the pistons cracking first, sending debris through the engine and into the turbo. On the Duramax side, I saw a post from an LLY owner who went through 3 turbos by 126,000 miles while running a programmer on stage 2 and doing heavy towing. That tune raises exhaust gas temperature and turbo speed beyond what the stock turbo was designed to handle. If you want to tune your Chevy turbo engine, go for it. I am not against modifications, but budget for the supporting parts too. Get an intercooler upgrade, a proper downpipe, and on the LTG, forged internals if you are going past about 300 horsepower. A tune without supporting mods is not free power. It is a down payment on a turbo replacement. Every habit on this list costs you nothing to fix, but ignoring even one of them can cost you thousands in turbo replacement parts and labor. But none of this will matter if you buy a car that is already meant for the junkyard. To be safe, go check out my video about the 7 things you absolutely need to check before you buy any used Chevy. Skip even one of those checks and you could end up with a truck that needs a new engine before your first payment clears.